Welcome to Speaking of Education, a Mount Vernon Ventures podcast, where as current education and leadership practitioners, we explore, research, and expand capabilities in order to build capacity in others so that the next generation might design a better world.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Ben from Mount Vernon Ventures with my esteemed colleagues yet again, and we are going to talk today about project-based learning. Hello, friends. How are you?
Hey, Ben. I'm Alex. Hi, everyone.
Hi, I'm Ann Marsh. Good to see you guys.
Amazing. So project-based learning is something we celebrate at Mount Vernon, but it's also a thing that a lot of other schools have celebrated as well. It's not unique to us, but I think there's still maybe some misunderstanding about what project-based learning is, what it's not, and what it can be. So, Ann Marsh or Alex, I'm just gonna come at this like say I'm new to project-based learning, and I'm just curious how you might answer this question. What's the difference between a project and project-based learning?
Good question. Well, I'm going to jump in there. I'm going to say the obvious that project-based learning involves projects. However, that is just the small component of what the learning is really about. The learning is through projects as opposed to the learning being the project. How's that sound?
Sense to me.
And Marsh, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add, I think about the projects that we probably all did as kids that were fun and memorable. And those are elements that we want to bring into PBL as well. But they were more like the cherry on top, right? Like you did it at the end. It was sort of a wrap up of something that may or may not have been a big piece of the learning, and you did the project to kind of show what you learned, versus project-based learning or PBL, where you're creating and working on the project throughout the whole course of the unit, not just at the end. And I think a couple other like really key distinctions. When I think about PBL, I think about a real world context. Mm-hmm. It's not just, making a hat for your mom or a castle that shows your book report, but it's something that's solving a driving question that's derived from a real world context. And because it's a real world context, it has a real audience and a public product that goes beyond the school walls. So those are kind of, I think, the most important distinctions in my mind.
That makes a lot of sense. I think maybe sort of to speak to your point, I think project-based learning with some people who are used to just hearing about projects or doing projects, it becomes associated with like, I don't know, like an arts and crafts type of mentality. Like I remember growing up, for me, whether it was elementary, middle, or high school, and I was not an amazing student, but anytime I had a project, my mom would go, "Oh no, we got to go to the arts and crafts store. We got to go to Michael's. We got to get all this stuff so you can do it." And of course, whatever I did was probably not worthy of display in a museum. And so it became associated in my family, projects with, oh gosh, some type of tedious thing that maybe is connected, but maybe not. And project-based learning, from what y'all are saying, is actually from top to bottom way different than just a project, right? And so we like to use the PBL Works website. They have the gold standard for project-based learning, and their definition here is simply this: project-based learning, PBL, is a teaching method in which students learn by actively engaging in real-world and personally meaningful projects. So exactly what y'all are talking about. The applicability here is the difference, right? So it's one thing to make an arts and crafts thing, and it's fun and it's a good time, but does this I don't know, styrofoam project that I made have any translatable quality to the world outside of this classroom? I don't know. What do y'all want to do? Do you want to discuss maybe some examples of PBL, or do you want to talk about the gold standard qualities like sustained inquiry and authenticity? How do you want to go about it?
Yeah, just to kind of offer up. So I went back into my bookshelf behind me. Actually, that's not true because it's a pretend background. I did get a book off the bookshelf. And I really like this one. It's Setting the Standard for Project-Based Learning. I don't know how many of you have read this one before. The authors are John Lamar, John Mergendaler, and Susie Boss. And a great book. It's small, quick read. But the one part actually that I liked best was there was a section that called What Project-Based Learning is Not. And it kind of went through what you were both talking about. And it had, 2 columns where, here are projects, and then here's what project-based learning is. So for example, projects are supplemental to a unit, where in project-based learning, the project is the unit or a major vehicle for teaching content standards within the unit. Projects are typically done individually, where in project-based learning, it's usually done in collaboration with a team. In projects, it's focused on the project, and the product may even be called the project, where in project-based learning, the project includes sustained inquiry process and the creation of a product. So it goes into more. I don't need to read the whole thing, but I think it's not that projects are bad, but I think when you look at it in the whole, it's just a small component, because there's so much more that makes a real PBL, project-based learning experience richer, and the students are guiding their learning rather than teachers like, okay, we read this book and now you will make a diorama of, a scene from the book. That's a project.
Right.
I think you're right. I think that one of the key outcomes from PBL is this sense of learner agency, because they have a voice and a choice, and they can go through a feedback cycle with peers and teachers so that they're iterating and making whatever the creation that they have that's solving that driving question is, they can make it better. And it's following a lot of the same processes that we as adults work in our own teams. And I think that's a really wonderful and developmentally appropriate way for them to learn what some people would call real world skills or career skills, but in the safety of our classroom environment.
I think what might be helpful, knowing that you both have led PBLs in your classrooms as teachers, and if the listeners can go to PBL Works and see, they have a really great image of the different components of the gold standard PBL. It can be overwhelming. There's 7 basic teaching principles, and you don't have to do all of them and at once. I think if you're moving into this, being able to tackle maybe a couple to start with and then build on that year to year. I think if you're a traditional teacher, you might look at some of these projects and feel really overwhelmed, like they're so chaotic. So, a question for the two of you, kind of looking at some of the different components, would you recommend, or which ones have you found were maybe really good ones to start with if you were kind of just starting out with PBL?
Oh yeah. Can I go?
Sure.
I think a great place to start, and there's no right or wrong place to start with the wheel, but a great one for me is student voice and choice. Just knowing that students are far more likely to be engaged and take something transferable with them from the experience if they're excited about the PBL experience. That's really good. I got to teach an iProject, or a couple of iProject classes. Our iProject has gone through various iterations at Mount Vernon, and now there's kind of a whole sort of department devoted to it. But a couple of years ago, I got to teach a couple of sections of it, and just letting students buy into something that they were interested about. We had a student who was really interested in women's health. We had another one who was interested in the effects of social media on teen anxiety. And they got a lot more out of those projects, I think, than if I had just, said, hey, we're all doing a project on this. So the buy-in is important, and student voice and choice helps to sort of, get that buy-in. That's my take.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I would start focusing on the idea of a public product, begin with the end in mind, basically. Like, think about what is aligned with your standards or your learning outcomes that could be a public product experience, and then who could a real audience for that be? And thinking about in hand, I think the authenticity piece goes with this, because thinking about areas within your own school that could lend themselves to PBL opens up a whole real world audience of other grade levels or other classes within the school, and makes it obviously very meaningful to the students, because it's a challenge that their school is facing. I know years ago, something that was facing our lower school, the kids were really upset about the disposable trays in the cafeteria.
Oh yeah.
And what happened to them and where they went, and the plastic forks and spoons. And as part of the PBL, they had a different sorting station where they were dumping the food for compost. They were dumping the trays. They were dumping the forks and spoons, plastic silverware for recycling. And that was something that they came up with. And it was something that was meaningful for them and very timely in terms of real world action. But they really got out of it. The public product was the things, right? Like every kid in the lower school saw that station that was set up. So it doesn't have to be a huge gallery showcase or, invite your parents to come and eat lunch. Although I'm sure parents would love to see that when they do come in. But it could be something that's, just put into action too as a real world product. So that's probably where I would say starting off. I'll also add, on PBL Works website, they have a really wonderful tool that I appreciate for teachers, that is a teaching rubric that basically allows teachers to gauge where they are in their practice. And so you can look at the indicators for a beginning PBL teacher, or developing, or proficient, gold standard, and kind of figure out where you need to go next, because it states the different indicators. So that's a tool that I really like to use when coaching teachers with PBL as well.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Ann Marsh.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I think it's just interesting how some of these categories in the gold standard PBL, connect and build off one another. Like you were talking about the public product being so important, which directly, that directly ties in and complements another component of it, which is authenticity. If you have a public product, it's going to be, authentic. And if it's authentic, it has implications, for the public, or presumably so. And so I just think it's super interesting how these sort of categories support each other. Another example here, I think, is critique and revision as an essential component of PBL, and how that maybe intersects with reflection. So I'm just, hopefully I'm not getting too abstract here, but I don't know, what do y'all think of that? How do you think the element of critique and revision intersects with the element of reflection in project-based learning?
Yeah, definitely some overlaps, I think. They have to exist hand in hand, right? There's the student reflection piece, but also the teacher and peer critique is a form of reflection as well. And I think that the critique and revision is giving action to the reflection, right? It's the next step, not just reflecting for the sake of reflection, but putting some change behind that.
And I also think parts of these, are maybe larger to incorporate, or some are just kind of a small, maybe mind shift, kind of to go back to authenticity, what you were thinking about earlier. It reminds me of a PBL that we did a few years ago in a kindergarten class. I think a lot of teachers sometimes are like, oh, PBLs are great for older kids who can be, independent, but you can do amazing work with the younger learners just as well. And so it was a PBL about the zoo and the habitats for animals. And the small shift was they had gone to the zoo, not the whole class, but the teachers had gone to the zoo and partnered with one of the educators who like runs some of the programming there. And the educator agreed to kind of help out with sort of launching the PBL. So a letter came, quote unquote, from the zoo asking the students for help to redesign what the habitats were that the zoo had, in their budget. They had planned to, put some money towards redoing. And if you had gone to the zoo, I think there was some construction going on in some of the habitats. So it looked authentic. So the kids, it wasn't just the teacher saying like, hey, we're going to talk about the zoo animals and where they live. It was coming from the zoo itself and, one of the program leaders there. So suddenly that small little shift made it so much more authentic to the kids. And there is that public product so you're right, Ben, I do feel, they're not individual components. They really are interrelated, though some kind of go hand in hand, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm reminded of Van Thornton and Clark Taylor, who teach at Mount Vernon. Their entire course is really, when you think about it, are PBL. Like if you're doing theater production, I mean, that's a huge project-based learning experience with constant critique and revision, right? You're constantly having to look at your process and look at how all these pieces are fitting together for an authentic public product, which is this really cool show that you get to share with people, that they get to, partake in the human experience that way, which is really cool. And in Van Thornton's class, I think it's a songwriting class. He does like an audio production class. Those students are constantly reflecting on what they're building, and they're getting feedback from each other. So there's kind of critique there, and they're listening to how other musicians have sampled various beats, and they can really just constantly engage in sort of a feedback and critique cycle that results in, like you were just saying, some type of public product. I mean, what's cooler than making a song and other people can listen to it and go, oh yeah, that's pretty neat. I mean, that's just like sometimes the entire course can just be PBL,
For sure.
And I would say it doesn't have to be, right?
Yeah.
You could start with one PBL unit that ran for a couple of weeks. It doesn't have to mean that if you want to do PBL, that has to be the only tool for teaching. But thinking about building a culture that would support PBL, but would also support other types of inquiry throughout the rest of the year, if that's not the main form of learning.
For
That's
sure.
that's a great point. And it's just like anything else. I think that sometimes people can hear about something like project-based learning and they think, well, I can't do that because then I have to change everything I'm doing for the entire year forever. And it doesn't have to be that way.
For sure.
Can try it out.
Well, and as you both said, I mean, looking at this wheel, just choose something that is certainly going to have an impact, on the learners in your classroom and your teaching practices anyway. Pick something to start and see how it goes and let that feel comfortable, and then add one more, and just kind of just maybe small little steps like that before you start to, take on a giant, I'm going to shift my entire, like that's pretty, that I mean, not that you can't, certainly there's a lot of support from your school and that could go into that, but yeah, just choose one and see how it goes.
Yeah. But that sounds like a challenge maybe, right?
Oh, maybe that is
our listeners to choose one element.
Choose one element just to see, obviously we're, this podcast is being recorded at the end of the year. And a lot of teachers are, finalizing grades, you're finishing up projects, is there something that, actually reflection might be a great one to incorporate with the end of the year coming up, reflect on your own learning and have the students just take a moment to reflect on, what they've been working on, maybe have a public product. So instead of just doing, bring in the project or whatever you're working on to show the class, like invite other administrators from your school or have a parent night or a learning showcase where you can invite some others to come and allow the students to show off their work. Just that small little shift might be something, and see what happens. It would be fun.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, anything else before we go here?
No, excited to hear. If you do try something on the PBL wheel, let us know, keep us posted, give a little shout out on a social media channel, and let us know how it goes.
Absolutely. That sounds great.
Thanks, Ben. Great topic.
Thank y'all. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. Speaking of Education is an original podcast hosted by Mount Vernon Ventures and produced by Mount Vernon Studios. For more information on Mount Vernon Ventures, follow us on LinkedIn.